Hi, I'm Sean,
I'm Rhonda.
and we're excited to be with you today. We want to talk with you about what the man's role in the marriage is and some issues that we've seen, some problem areas that we've seen that are maybe from a misunderstanding about what that role should look like. So let's first look at the word husband. So in the Bible, it uses the term husbandman as like a gardener, a person that's taking care of maybe fruit-bearing plants or trees. So if you look at the concept of a husband being like a husbandman who is taking care of his garden, a husband wants to take care of his wife in the same way.
A wife has her own unique needs. And so, for a man to be a husband to his wife, he's taking care of those unique needs. And when we think of the Christ church relationship, we see Christ taking care of the church, and the church sometimes being the more needy, well, definitely in that relationship, being the more needy person. And we see a lot of times, don't we, that the woman is the one who sees the things we could do to adjust and grow in the relationship. And so for a man to zero in on what does my wife need because she is female, and what does my wife need just because she is a unique female.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say you are a husbandman taking care of some tomato plants. And so if you walk out and the leaves are wilting, do you fuss at your plant? Or if the leaves are yellow, do you rebuke the plant? You ought not to, be that way. You need to have bright green leaves and be bearing luscious fruit. For example, you'd say, hey, I need to water it more. I need to give it this nutrient. It's in need of something that I need to give it. And so you're the man is the one, as the husbandman, as the caretaker, as the gardener, who's responsible for feeding and nourishing the wife with what she has need of. So if you see your wife is maybe lacking or needing in a certain area, you're the one who has the responsibility to give to her that nutrient that she needs to flourish.
And I think of that in Ephesians 5, where it talks about that the man is supposed to nourish and cherish his wife.
Yeah.
Isn't that what a husbandman is doing?
It is exactly what he's doing. So let's look at that in Ephesians chapter 5, where it says that Jesus, the way he takes care of the church is he nourishes, cherishes the church.
And every woman wants to be nourished and cherished. And so, when we think about a man, his wife is endeared to him. She is a special and precious thing to him.
Yeah, the better we take care of our garden, right? The more fruit that we're going to get from it. It works the same way in our marriage relationship. The more we are nurturing to our wife, the more that we're going to receive back as we pour into and take care of those needs. If we look at in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15, he says that Jesus was touched with the feeling of our infirmities, that he might be a faithful and a merciful high priest. So you see there that Jesus is in touch with what we're feeling so that he can better take care of us. That's the power, right, of what God did, is that he sent Jesus to become a man so that he could deliver us and save us. And so this is the relationship between a husband and wife is the same as that between Christ and the church. So what you see Christ doing for the church is what the husband is to model toward his wife.
Yeah, and when I as a woman think about my husband doing this for me, or as the church that Christ did this for me, coming to walk in my shoes, to understand my infirmities, to be touched with my feelings. And infirmities there has to do with weaknesses, the struggles we women deal with, and we feel like our emotions are like the little roller coaster ride. And I think some men can inadvertently shame their wives for being female. And yet this is part of who we are, as part of our makeup, the emotion and everything. And we instead want our spouse to be able to connect with that and be able to love us through that. But be in touch with what I feel.
Yeah.
Understanding what I'm dealing with instead of always having to have that fix-it mentality. Well, let me fix you. It's like, what about just understand me and be able to relate so that I feel a connection here based on who I am and what I'm dealing with.
You know, if you look at Isaiah chapter 53, he says, Jesus bore our pains and he carried our sorrows, and with his stripes we are healed. So if you look at that in the marriage relationship taking place, a husband is bearing her infirmities, he's bearing her pains and her sorrows, and he's carrying that in his body, and then that is bringing healing to her. Also in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 17, it says that in all things it behooved him, Christ, to be made like to his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest. So you've got the same wording, the wording there, that of him being a merciful and faithful high priest by being made like us. And so, you know, I think of it that if a husband is hurt with what hurts her, you know, a lot of times we don't want to go there, right? If something's hurting our spouse, that's uncomfortable to us, and we don't want to go there. Nobody wants to feel hurt, right? We all kind of move away from that. But if the more that we enter into that and share that, kind of like in Galatians, it says to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So in the marriage, if I am bearing her burden, if I'm carrying that with her, then I am really carrying that and removing that from her.
I like that it says merciful and faithful. I think a lot of women are looking for that in their husbands, for him to have mercy on them, and not try to masculinize the female, but to be able to embrace, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, that which is feminine, which is very different from that which is masculine. And then that faithfulness, it builds trust. For a woman, when a man is faithfully loving her, caring, and keeping that connection going, regardless of what she's dealing with, that he so knows her, that he's journeying alongside with her in that.
Yeah, it's not really, you know, him so much, you know, I want to change you, right? But I want to carry that for you. Yeah. And take a burden off, seeing that if our spouse is struggling, they're carrying a burden, and we need to come alongside. That's the joy of marriage. That's why we got married, right? Is to carry those burdens together. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, where it says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge. There's a science there, an understanding. And he talks about as being heirs together of the grace of life. You know, we're talking about there about that our spouse is together with us. We're joint heirs together, and it's not, doesn't give the picture of the, you know, the man's here and the, you know, the woman is underneath him in the sense of a lower scale or something. We don't need to be looking at between the male and female that one is superior and the other is inferior. Both are made in the image and likeness of God. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 5, it talks about the concept that when a man and a wife are in their first year of marriage, that he's not to be charged with any business, go out to war, but he says stay at home and cheer up his wife. So think about this as the concept of planting a tree, and a lot of times you see these guide wires that are put around trees when they're first planted to make sure that as it is getting its root system established, that it's growing up in the direction that you want it to go. And so in the marriage, it's so important that what we're doing early on in the marriage is something that we want to last, and that idea that he is to cheer up his wife. He's to make sure that she is happy.
And so the whole idea of this is, of course, the women are going to like it. Why? Because God laid it out this way, and it's the way to make a man approachable for a woman to want to submit to. So a man shouldn't demand that a woman submit. You should be submitting to me. Well, the first thought would be, are you being obedient to the Word of God to be the kind of man God is asking her to submit to?
Yeah.
You know, but when we think about what they would do this first year, you know, we think about all the habits that would be set up during that first year as he is focusing, withdrawing from business and war and political things.
Over the economy and over national defense. Of course, in Genesis, and Jesus repeated this in Matthew, he talks about a man leaving his father and mother and cleaving to his wife. So that word cleave to is to pursue or to stick to like glue. And so, that is something that many times in the beginning of a relationship before marriage, you see the man pursuing the woman, going after her, but that's not to ever stop.
Right. And if you look at your wife, husbands, as a helper that God gifted to you, then you would be pursuing that help, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, this is where God comes to the man and says, basically, you need help. It's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. And this is where he brings Eve to Adam. And so for a man to realize, that he needs help, I need this woman in my life, and God's going to speak to me. God's going to move in my life. God's going to bring help to me through this woman. And so that I'm trusting that God is working and speaking through her.
Does that sound like a woman that's a doormat to you?
Hey, a lot of times you see men take care of their tools, right? Men are very tool-oriented, very fix-it-oriented. And, if you look at that concept of your wife through that lens, I think that might help you to make a good comparison there. So while we're in Genesis, let's look at in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. He says that God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, said to them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue the earth, have dominion over every living thing that moves on the earth. So what are we seeing here? This is the very beginning when God made male and female, and they are both equally, man and woman, masculine and feminine, are representing the image of God. Yeah. So when he made man in the beginning, you have this embodied in one body, male and female, and then we see in Genesis 2 where he removed the rib from Adam, and out of that made the woman. Mm-hmm. And so all of these things of God are where he said the two shall be one. He made them one, then made them two, and then he said, and the two shall be one. Yeah. And so by masculine connecting with feminine and vice versa, we find that perfection that God intended us to enjoy. He made us both as kings and priests. He said that we are in Revelation chapter 1. He says that we are kings and priests to God and his Father. So that's both male and female. And of course, in Galatians, he says that in Christ there's neither male nor female, for you are all one. And so he's showing the oneness of our relationship together and how God sees us and how we ought to see our spouse, that we're jointly sharing in power.
And you look at Jesus and the disciples and you see that, the man may have a lot of things that his will might be for his wife to move into this or that would be his desires that maybe she hasn't quite lined up with yet. But we look at Jesus saying to the disciples, I have a lot of things to say to you, but you can't handle them yet. That's in John 16:12.
Yeah.
Jesus withheld it because he was not going to cram it down their throats. He allowed the church to grow as they were capable, as they were able.
And this is a really powerful thing to live out in our marriage. If in the marriage either the man or the woman saw that the other one was a little bit weaker in an area or something, you don't see that concept of God forcing or pushing something, even
Right.
even as a parent with a child, when they're learning to eat different foods and even to eat meat, for example. You don't give them different types of food or even meat in the beginning. They start off with milk and progress, and we don't want to choke our spouse
Yeah.
and lose them over trying to force something on them.
And that's allowing our spouse to be where they are and to grow into something in the relationship instead of insisting and forcing.
Yeah.
It's isn't it demonic power and influence that tends to take over, control, force,
Dominate.
dictate. But Holy Spirit guides, directs, encourages, and strengthens us as we grow. These things should be a choice. They should not be taken. Things in a marriage relationship should be given and offered, not taken.
Yeah, because we are to respect and to recognize the individuality and the choice and will of each other. You don't see God
Yeah.
overriding our will. He said, "Whoever will, let him come." It's not, I know best, and I'm going to shove it down your throat. Whether you want it or not. No, we have to choose. We have to decide, and it's the same way in the marriage. We don't need to be forcing,
Yeah.
pushing our spouse. We need to allow them to make their own decisions and choose. In Acts chapter 15 and verse 10, when the Gentiles first turned to God, initially the Jewish believers were saying, "Hey, don't they need to be keeping all the law of Moses?" And after they kind of studied on it for a while, they said, "Hey, why tempt you God to put a yoke on them that we haven't been able to bear ourselves?" And that was in the concept of maybe all of the particular laws of Moses. And that he's saying that, just these three necessary things he presented to them. Just have them keep these things. And so basically the idea is there, we don't need to be putting a yoke on our spouse, a heaviness, a burden to them that they cannot handle or bear.
And you look under the old covenant, and the people couldn't measure up, right? So that's why God sent Jesus, to make up that
Wow.
deficit and basically say, "I accept you just as you are." He died for us while we were yet sinners. And so if you could see that if your wife is doing something against you, if you could allow her to grow between her and the Lord into, doing the things that you might want to see in the marriage, and realizing that God isn't heavy-handed.
Yeah.
He is not burdening people down, putting a yoke on them they cannot handle, and that where they can never measure up, but He accepts us like we are.
What I'm thinking about again is gardening, and so hard ground, putting a heaviness on your plant, and then you expect it to flourish. What do? You get out there, you break up the ground, you make the ground soft so it can receive the rain, and so it can grow, and the roots can spread out easily in the ground. Hard, compacted ground is not a good growing environment for a plant. And so having that concept in the marriage, I want to make things open. I want open as
air where you breathe.
Right, breathable,
Yeah.
right, so that my spouse can breathe, not a heaviness.
Which suffocates and
Yeah.
strangles the life out of a marriage.
Yeah. So
Also, we see the idea here of ask what you will, and it'll be done for you. Jesus came to serve. Look at how He spent His time on earth. He didn't do things to care for Himself,
Yeah.
but continuously made Himself available to care for them. What would you have me do?
Oh goodness, and that is so powerful, because you see the idea where Jesus, what was it? James and John, wanted to sit by his side, and the whole idea came up of how he said the Gentiles rule over.
Yeah.
They exercise dominion, but he said it's not going to be that way among you. He said the least of you will be the greatest, and that the one that is servant to all is going to be the greatest one. And so Jesus said, that's the way I came. He said, I came to give my life as a ransom for many and to serve. I mean, we see that in John chapter 13, where he took the towel, girded himself, and he washed the disciples' feet. And he came to serve us. He says things, you read in the New Testament where he would ask, what would you have me do for you? What is it you want? That's a servant, a person that's come to serve, and that is a man, as a leader, right, in the house. That's what he's telling us to do, is to serve like Christ, and that's the greatest one.
And even when it talks about elders, it says, to serve by example, not by being lord over the people.
Not being lords over God's heritage.
But the thing is, I think when people mix in carnality with what is godly headship, they start playing dictator. And taking over a worldly mentality, when in fact being a leader is actually taking on that servanthood.
In Ephesians 5, it talks about the husband as head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. And I think we've kind of explored that enough to see that, the head is not one that is in a dominating, I'm knocking you down, the lower I put you, the higher I go kind of thing. That's not the way, that he does things. He raises us up to sit with him in heavenly places. And so in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14, he says, I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, and give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. So if you look at the word guide there, it is to be the head of and rule a family. And so, many times you hear people, men, using the concept of, God made me, to be the head of the house and the priest of the household. We just want to make sure that we have the right idea of what a head is and what a head is doing. We already saw that in I think it was Mark chapter 10, where he talked about the head is actually the lowest, the one that's serving the others. And here, actually, he's saying that the woman is the head of the house and that she is guiding the family.
And that word there about guiding means to be head or rule a family. So it's not a godly thing for a man to strip a woman of her power and authority. Look at what Jesus did for the church.
Oh, goodness.
He came to give the church power and authority. And the church struggles to the extent they don't know who they are. That they do not walk in the Spirit of Christ and represent Christ with the empowerment that he gives for us to accomplish the things we're supposed to accomplish.
It is so powerful when you see there in Matthew 28, when Jesus was resurrected and he said, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth, go ye. What do you see there? He's sharing power with us. He's not saying, no, it's all mine. He's saying, hey, all power is given to me. Now you go, you take that power and that authority and you do things.
And I think of Proverbs 31 as we talk about all of this, where the woman is, you look at the Proverbs 31 woman. Oh, wow. She is no doormat. No. She is out there seeing land and buying it. So she's not one of these women that doesn't have access to the money. She's a stay-at-home mom and she doesn't have any money. No, she's got the money. Yeah. She has access and she knows what to do with it.
She's profitable. She is bringing the household up. She's clothing the household, it said, with scarlet. She has the ability. This woman is making decisions. She has power. And her husband, it said, sits in the gate. So he's in a position of authority, but you don't see him micromanaging the woman, telling her every move to make.
Right. Instead, he empowers her.
1 Corinthians 7, he says there that the husband and wife ought to render or give due benevolence, due kindness. Something is owed to your spouse. And I owe something to Rhonda, she owes something to me, and that we are to be giving that thing that is owed to them, and that we are to meet their need and not neglect them. So the man isn't saying, I make all the decisions. No, He is to share that power, and
Yeah.
she has power over him. He has power over her. You're going to spend your whole married life learning how to do it better. And it's
Yeah.
the same way in our relationship with God. It's not a once and done, well, I gave my life to the Lord and now I'm just going to coast from here on out and I'm never going to have to grow, never going to have to change anything. That's not the right concept to have.
Yeah.
So we're going to be corrected in our relationship with God. We're going to be growing. Hopefully you're better today than you were yesterday in your walk with God.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're better, this month or this year than you were last month or last year. Same way in your relationship with your spouse. So let's go and look at Malachi chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. And here, this is kind of a sad commentary. Basically, it's showing the wife is weeping and crying on the altar, and that God is not receiving the man's offering anymore because God has been a witness, because the man has dealt treacherously against his wife, calls her the wife of his youth, and he says because she is his companion and the one that he has made a covenant with, and God made them one.
He says, pay attention to your spirit that you don't deal treacherously, because God hates putting away. So you want to be watching your spirit. Are you hardening to her? Are you shutting her out? Are you separating yourself or certain things from her so she doesn't have access to you or access to money or parenting or whatever part of life?
Look at when he says that God is saying, hey, you're treating your wife treacherously. What is treachery? What is being treacherous? And so looking at that, it's to cover with a garment, to act covertly, to pillage, and treating unfaithfully. And so, we don't want to treat our spouse in a covert or an unfaithful way. We want to be treating them respectfully and honoring them in the relationship.
And notice here, she's weeping and crying on the altar. She's calling out to God for help.
This is a sad state here, and it says that God is a witness on this. You look going back to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. The end of that verse is that he says all these things, that a man ought to dwell with her according to knowledge, with his wife according to knowledge, that his prayers not be hindered. And so, man, we don't want a God bearing witness against us because we aren't treating our wife right, because she's weeping and crying. Oh my goodness, that is not the kind of relationship you want to be in. We need to be sensitive and paying attention to, am I cheering up my wife? Are you happy?
Yeah.
Am I serving you? How can I minister to you better? How can I meet your needs better? Man, you are empowered by God. God has empowered you to meet every need that she has, that he intended for you to meet. So if there's anything in his word that he says for you to meet that's her need, you have the capability and the power to meet that need. He wouldn't be asking or telling you to do something he did not also equip and empower you to do. With each male and female, their strengths and corresponding weaknesses. And that's where God put us together to be one, where what I need, my wife is supplying. What she needs, I'm supplying. And the two of us is kind of like gears working together, right? And we're like a puzzle pieces are fitting together, and we are joining together to be better and greater than we were apart. A lot of times I think in the marriage relationship, when you see something that's out of sync, that isn't working, it's revealing something that is not working in a person's relationship with God. And so if we have this concept that God is that ruling monarch who is overriding, my will, and he is demanding and not sharing power and these type things, we're going to transfer that to our spouse, and that's the way we're going to treat them because we see that that's the way God's treating me. But when you see the concept of how Christ came and shares power with us and invites us to ask what we will, and that he is making us to sit with him as joint heirs with him in heavenly places, you see him lifting us up, not putting us down, but by, it's like that he would become greater by making us smaller. No, he is great by lifting us up, and that we should be doing that with our spouse, not putting down, not micromanaging, not controlling.
Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, she cannot hold up under the pressure he's putting on her. And he's pointing a finger, look at her. Look at what she's doing.
Yeah,
Something's wrong with her.
You're falling apart. Get yourself together instead of let me come along. Let me hold up your arms, like the concept of Aaron and Hur holding up Moses' arms. There he had assistance, and the victory Israel received because he had help holding his arms up. We want to come alongside our spouse, and if we see a weakness, we cover it, right? We lift up, we encourage, we strengthen. We have that husbandman mentality of let me give you what you need to grow and to flourish. Let me lead by example, not by squashing you, not by taking power away from you, not by me isolating you, but by me coming alongside you, holding you up, and causing you to grow and flourish, and you be everything that God wants you to be. What if a man says, I didn't think my words were that harsh. I didn't think that it should have equaled the wilting effect that it had on her. She's just too sensitive, or she took that wrong. She didn't understand my heart. That's really justifying what you're doing, regardless of the impact that it has on your spouse. Rather, we need to change our delivery so that that they're having the impact that is intended. And so we may have to change our words because the way that is being received by our spouse. It's kind of like a person sitting in their boat and poking holes in it, hoping that it's going to take them to the other side. And if a person is attacking their spouse, they're drilling holes in their own vessel. It's like you want to drive somewhere, so you go out and you slice your tires, right? So it just makes no sense. It makes no sense within the marriage that the one that God created you to do life together with, who's one with you, and to attack them and to put holes in your own vessel that you need to carry you. You're never going to rise to what God has for you by putting your spouse down in any way, by choking them, by restricting them. You're restricting and choking down your own engine that is to carry you, the one that God brought to help you, that he said you need help. Now here's this one, and you're going to be benefited by choking your help. Which makes a woman feel like a prostitute, and that when she performs well, then he gives her some kind of allowance or some kind of a payment, and that's not the kind of a flourishing relationship. As today, as I was kind of thinking over the things that we would be sharing along this line, I thought of a phrase from the book of Nahum where God said to Israel, "Consider your ways." And when he said that, what was taking place was God's house temple was lying waste, needed to have repairs done to it, yet God's people were living in very nice houses. And so he's saying, hey, consider your ways. You're taking care of your own thing, but you're not taking care of my things. And he said actually to them, he says, you're bringing in money, but you're putting it into bags with holes in it. Basically, you're bringing it in, and you're losing it just as fast as you're bringing it in. And he's saying, consider your ways. Sometimes, we need to stop and we need to think, kind of like when I said that about, being in a boat and you're drilling holes in it, consider what we are doing. What is the net result of what my actions are. What is the impact of what I'm doing on my spouse? And if this is what I'm experiencing, something needs to change. And we can't change. I can't change my wife. I can only change me. God hasn't given me the power to change my spouse or any other person.
That's where you get into witchcraft.
That's right. I don't have the power to change anyone but me. And I have to take responsibility for me. And I can't say, but she's doing this and she's doing that. No, but what am I doing? Because I'm the only one that has power to change me. And so I take full responsibility, kind of like, you're familiar with the phrase, the buck stops here, right? So I take responsibility, I'm responsible, and I'm not passing this off to somebody else. I take responsibility, kind of like, you hear the phrase, man up, right? So we want to man up, and we want to take responsibility for my part, my contribution, what I'm doing.
The male voice is deep anyway. And when you put some firmness or emotion, negative emotion to it, it feels harsh to the female ears. Probably one of the number one things we hear from women is he comes across as harsh. He's innocent. Some of them are in it. And because among men, that's not harsh. That's the way they talk to each other. That's the way they banter.
It works two ways, A woman sometimes can be intense in her presentation.
Come across as disrespectful.
Maybe be wordy or something. And so the man withdraws from that and says, change that. But she can say, oh, I'm just being myself, right? This is the way I communicate. I communicate this way.
That doesn't make it okay.
A little more emotional or something, and you ought to live with it and be okay with it. No, this works both ways. So the man has some things to change in communication, and so does the woman. We don't want to minimize our spouse. We need to listen to what's going on with them and bear their infirmities. That's what we've already talked about. God made the male and female different, and just because our spouse is different from us doesn't mean that their viewpoint is inferior to ours. 1 Samuel chapter 25, between Nabal, who was the husband, and Abigail, which was the wife. And so there was an incident where King David was out and had the opportunity for he and his men watched some of Nabal's sheep. So Nabal was an evil person, and basically says that he was a churlish man, and which means severe, cruel, hard-hearted, heavy, stubborn, stiff-necked. Basically, he wasn't going to do anything to reward David and his men for taking care of his sheep. And Abigail found out about this. He kind of railed on David, said, who is David and everything. And Abigail found out, well, David and his men were going to come in and basically get what they needed and attack Nabal's household. Abigail found out about it, and she began to get provisions together to take care of them. So she had, the whole idea here by bringing this up is to see that Abigail was empowered to be able to do something that saved the household. So we want to talk about now, what to do if you find yourself in an unhealthy relationship where these negative things are taking place. How do you recover?
First of all, you have to realize it's happening. You can't travel anywhere if you don't first know where you are.
True.
And so we would encourage you, please pray over what we've just shared.
So one of the first things is having a roommate mentality. And many times, in a marriage, we can think, oh, my spouse ought to be interacting with me this way, or I ought to be able to say or do this. But you're not there if you're in an unhealthy relationship. And so you need to go take several steps back and see, just like you would with somebody that's more of a stranger or just not a close acquaintance, you don't take certain liberties there.
If you look at the spectrum of relationship, you need to rebuild. And you're probably on the level of an acquaintance with your spouse. And so if you think, what would I do to get my wife to look at me and want to even spend time and be around me? That's phase one. Just be pleasant, be nice, fix yourself. and physically and emotionally be attractive and pleasant to be around. If she says something, just let her say it and be done. You may have to set boundaries. You may have to say, hey, would you watch your tone so we can keep talking? And you may have to say, and if she won't and she's too intense, you may have to say, well, I'm going to have to stop talking because this is getting too intense for me.
And I'm thinking that in the beginning of the relationship and the dating stage, there probably wasn't a lot of, and I want you to change this, and I don't like it that you're doing this going on. There's probably just more of learning each other and adapting to each other and that type of thing. So you're going to have to go back to that, and the relationship isn't supporting your saying that I want you to change. Here's my list.
I don't like it that you're not doing this or that you are doing this. And let's say this, she's probably not having sex with you. Or she may not be frequently enough or pleasant when you do. She may not want to. Mm-hmm. A lot of women don't because they're so severely emotionally injured at this point. Leave her alone. Give her some space to heal and make her want to be with you like that again. It doesn't make sense to a woman to give herself physically to a man when he's not giving himself emotionally to her.
Yeah. If the plant is withered, wilting, feed the plant, water the plant, and then you get some fruit, right? So you don't want to be demanding and take what isn't freely given. So we need to be sowing into planting, depositing, right? And then you can make withdrawals from an account that you've made some deposits in, but you can't make any withdrawals if you're not making any deposits.
And withdrawals aren't good, so you don't want to make them once you become aware. But we accidentally do, don't we?
Yeah.
So unconditional love and acceptance is huge. Accepting your spouse exactly as they are. And they feel loved, they feel accepted, even if they made zero changes. That's what God does for us. That's what we expect. Don't we expect grace from my spouse? Well, but sometimes we're not giving grace. And we're like, can you be merciful if I mess up? Well, I don't know. Can you be merciful? We sow these seeds and then we reap a harvest we don't like. And it's like, well, what seeds did I sow? Did I sow the right seeds and for long enough? And, as you turn in this relationship, rebuilding trust takes time.
It does.
So give it some time.
And we want to have more of that live and let live mentality, not where we are demanding from our spouse or else.
Right. And that means that your spouse may make some choices you're not wild about. And we're probably telling her similar things about you, if you're working with us, that is. Yeah. If not, if you're just watching this video and you're working on your own, if you can think roommate, you don't control a roommate, and that's how you start to rebuild. It's not meant to be a long-term place to live in. It's meant to position you for healing first, recovery, and then rebuild. We have a lot of videos about connecting.
Just like you are going to go on a road trip, right? And so you first recognize, here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. And there are checkpoints between where I am and where I want to be. And just because you arrive at the first checkpoint, that's not where you want to stay, but it's on your journey to get there.